Magandang araw, Podmates! Howie Severino muli na bukod sa nagpapaalala, nakakatalino ang mahabang attention span, ay nagpapasalamat din sa kauna-unahang award ng Howie Severino Podcast na iginawad ng Catholic Mass Media Awards for Best Education Program. So maraming salamat po para sa parangal na ito. Ang guest natin ngayon ay may makulay na buhay at mahabang career sa pagiging aktivista, human rights campaigner mula nung nasa kolehiyo pa siya nung dekada 60 hanggang ngayon nagtatanggol siya ng mga karapatan ng mga senior citizen. Edna Aquino, dating Amnesty International campaigner sa London, ngayon influencer sa iba't ibang issue ng human rights. Magandang araw sa iyo, Edna Aquino.
Hello, Howie. Magandang hapon sa lahat. At kinagagalak ko na maging panauhin mo dito sa iyong podcast. Isa akong tagahanga.
Salamat, Edna. The feeling is mutual. Pero I want to open, Edna, with some good news, no? Kasi former Senator Leila de Lima was in jail for 7 years, no? And has been recently released. And she was our highest profile political prisoner in modern times. What does it say about our political environment today? Anong reaction niyo nung pinalaya si former Senator de Lima?
First of all, yung 7 taon niya, almost 7 years ng pagkakulong, is a gross injustice, no? Especially based on trumped up charges. Bagamat wini-welcome natin yung pagpapalaya kay Senator Leila, I think hindi doon nagtatapos dapat ang pagpupursige ng hustisya kasi siguro yung ginawa sa kay Senator Leila ang isa sa pinaka maduming paggamit ng justice system ng gobyerno. Kung maalaala nyo, katakot-takot na pambabastos sa kanyang pagkatao ang ginawa. Hindi lang ng presidente. Alam naman natin, si President Duterte nung panahon ng kanyang administrasyon ay nangunguna sa pambabastos sa mga kababaihan. Pero mismo yung Kongreso, no, pinagtulong-tulungan siya. At Senado din, no? Mga colleagues niya sa Senate na dapat man lang nagpakita ng civility sa kanilang kapwa senador. So sa akin, mahabang paglalakbay pa itong nangyari kay Senator Leila. As I said, wini-welcome natin kasi dapat lang talaga na mapalaya siya. Pero I really hope that Senator Leila would pursue her case against the government and really put on record that what they did to her should not happen to anyone. Kasi magsiset na yan ng president kahit na sabihin pa na pinalaya siya. Remember na ang basis ng pagpapalaya sa kanya is still very much relatively tenuous, no? Hindi pa tapos, hindi pa talaga fully sinara yung mga kaso sa kanya. Nag-retract yung mga witnesses. Pero wala pang final verdict na siya ay inosente sa mga ginawang trumped-up charges sa kanya.
Yeah, tama kayo. I should have prefaced my question by saying she's out on bail pa lang. Wala pa talagang final decision yung kaso. In fact, theoretically, pwede pa siyang ibalik sa kulungan. No?
Yes. At natutuwa ako na kahit na gano'n ang ginawa sa kanya, kung makikita nyo sa mga statements niya, although mas delicate ang kanyang pagsasagot sa mga questions ng media, makikita mo na nandoon yung determinasyon niya na maituwid talaga yung ginawa sa kanya. Kung paano niya gagawin yan sa current political climate nga na kung saan ginagawa rin siyang parang trophy ng gobyernong BBM para ipakita na may justice system sa Pilipinas na nagbibigay ng ganong klaseng supposedly justness sa case na tulad ng kanya.
Before we leave the topic of Senator de Lima, I want you to know your thoughts about how the release of Leila de Lima on parole, no, is helping fuel this narrative that Marcos Jr. is better and less autocratic than former President Duterte. more respectful of rule of law and more respectful of, human rights?
Well, dahil napaka-bulgar nung pinanggalingan natin na administrasyon pagdating sa usapin ng civility, decency, no? Yung pumalit sa kanya, kahit papaano mabango, no? Relatively mabango. Effective ang handling sa kanya maski pa naman nung presidential campaign. Ngayon, anong tingin ko sa kanya? I think may mga signs na talagang hindi siya ganoon ka direktang nagbibigay ng order kung paano ang handling, ang treatment ng mga kapulisan halimbawa sa mga oposisyon, no? Very deliberate yun na hindi niya papel na yan ng mga enforcers. Pero makikita mo may mga unti-unti na mga reports tungkol sa EJ case. Hindi naman talaga tumigil yung EJK na related sa droga. Tapos may balita nung isang araw tungkol sa disappearances ng 2 aktivista. So, hindi natin nakikita kasi bakit? Posible na siguro baka yung mga kasamahan natin sa media ay hindi rin na masyadong nagka-follow up na sa mga pangyayaring ganyan. Baka pati tayo din nadadala doon sa ganung klaseng image na pinopromote tungkol sa kanya. Ang preoccupation kasi natin ngayon, sa totoo lang din, ay tungkol sa kagutuman, no? Paghihirap din ng mga kababayan natin naghihikahos. Tapos yung usapin mismo ng climate change, napakalaking problema ng climate change. Kaliwat kanan yung mga disasters na nangyayari sa probinsya. Halimbawa, yung recent lang na baha pala sa Samar, hindi man lang nakarating dito sa Maynila ang mga balita unless nakikita natin sa TV. So, maraming pangyayari sa iba't ibang bahagi ng bansa na hindi na natin masyadong binibigyan ng atensyon. At dyan siguro ang hamon natin sa mga kasamahan sa media na baka may kailangan ding tingnan kung bakit at ano ang papel nila in terms of pagpapakita ng mga mas malawak na pananaw tungkol sa tunay na pangyayari sa bansa. Effective talaga yung communication handling ng government ni BBM tungkol sa kanyang image. I have to give into that. Minsan ako nadadala dun eh.
Okay, pero nabanggit mo nga yung campaign, no? Yung presidential campaign, you did not, of course, support him. You supported his main opponent, si Leni Robredo, no? In fact, yung mga kalaban niya, yung mga nangangampanya laban kay BBM o Marcos Jr. ay yung iba nagsinasabi he's an existential threat, and parang it seemed to be like a life and death struggle, no, nung panahon ng kampanya, no. So when he won, how did you feel?
I was not surprised at all. Kasi matagal kong binantayan yung yung resurgence, pagbabalik ng mga Marcoses. Mula pa nung unang tumatakbo sila sa local election, tapos sa Senate, unti-unti napakahusay ng strategy nila for a comeback. So hindi ako talaga nagulat, apart from of course stories of malalim ang bulsa nila for the election. Pero meron din akong gustong ipunto dito na isa rin siguro sa nakatulong kahit papano sa kampanya ni BBM na nagpanalo sa kanya, na ang ilang bahagi ng oposisyon, yung narrative namin, natigil na dun sa martial law ng tatay niya. Na bagamat malaga, no? Hindi siya tumutuhog dun sa mga hindi namin ka-generation eh. Imagine story siya ng repression ng martial law, no? Kaya kahit ano pang sabihin na ganito talaga nangyari sa amin ng martial law, hindi siya tumatagos eh. And I think that is something na kailangan patuloy na pag-aralan kung paano natin ikwento yung nangyari ng martial law, and yet hindi tayo tumitigil sa narrative na yon kasi nga masyado nang malayo sa imahinasyon ng sumunod ng mga henerasyon, ng mga mas nakakabatang henerasyon. In fact, mismo sa mga ka-generation namin, malayo din siya eh. Kasi kung hindi talaga sila direktang na-involved sa political struggle ng panahon na yon, malayo din eh. Parang kinakausap ko yung mga kapitbahay ko na mga seniors din, hindi hindi tumitimo yung kwento sa kanila about martial law. And that is
Mhm.
something to reflect upon, no?
Nagulat ako ano na actually totoo yung sinasabi mo no, pero siguro dahil ako'y nasa mga silo din ng aking mga social circles na medyo woke, no? They're very conscious of what's going on in society, the politics, and the history ng ating bansa, no? So, akala ko yung itong pag sinabing never again, no, ng mga aktivista, akala ko that really had an impact, no? Kasi madalas naman may lumalabas sa media tungkol sa kasaysayan natin sa nung martial law, no, may mga monumento tayo, may bantayog, no. There are movies that have been made, may mga libro naman na lumabas, may mga movements, may mga social media accounts and Facebook pages about all of this, no. And yet sinasabi mo nga ngayon na parang it didn't really seep down, no? And of course we know that now kasi nga because of the comeback of the Marcoses, no? But from your international experience, no, other countries have gone through similar historical traumas, no? They've gone through experiences that they don't want to repeat again, and
Mm.
hasn't been repeated. I mean, Europe has gone through some terrible things. What have other societies done that were more effective than what has happened in the Philippines? Tayo sabi nyo nga, may collective trauma tayo, or do you think this trauma didn't affect enough people?
By coincidence, nanood ako ng Miss Universe contest last week, no? And, the venue is El Salvador. Nung panahon ko, we were campaigning against human rights violations in Salvador when we were having our democratic space during the latter part na of martial law here in the
Mm-hmm.
Philippines. Napaka-grim ng pangyayari sa El Salvador nung panahon na yon, no? Mas brutal at gumamit pa ng mga contrast, no? Ang US government ng panahon na yon, nag-import pa ng mga mercenaries para gumawa ng mga human rights violations. But look at El Salvador now, parang wala rin nangyaring kadiliman nung panahon na yon. So I was thinking, parang may comparison yata yung nangyari sa El Salvador at sa Pilipinas. Isa sigurong pwede kong sabihin na hindi lang sa Pilipinas nangyayari yan, no? Sa maraming parte kung saan ka-generation ng martial law ng Philippines. Nicaragua, halimbawa, isa rin yan. Iniidolo namin noon si Ortega na namuno ng liberation movement sa Nicaragua. Later on, he turned out to be a dictator and even accused of, violence against women. Sarili niyang stepdaughter. Ngayon, ano naman yung kabilang mukha? I think I'm looking at the example of Chile, kunyari. But why Chile? Kasi malawak talaga yung ginawa ni Pinochet, tsaka mas mahaba talaga yung repression period ni Pinochet sa Chile. And I have to give credits to the activists in Chile. Very enduring din sila talaga, no? So yun ang isa siguro nakikita kong ka-generation ng Pilipinas nung panahon na yon, those dark years of the 70s, no, when several countries were under similar condition of what you call then the low intensity conflicts in Latin America. This was also done here in the Philippines. So Chile would be something I can think of na, and I think there are several factors kung bakit ganun, the magnitude of the problem, the resilience of the opposition of the movement, and they handled it well to the point that they were able to really successfully brought to power, progressive politicians, no? So yun ang isang nakikita ko example. Siguro ang reflection na dapat mangyari would be on the part of the opposition kasi alam naman natin ang nangyari sa opposition dito. We had many episodes of fragmentation, no? Malalim yung ideological differences. And, election after election, I would be one of those voices saying, mag-unite kayo, mag-unite tayo, and yet parang it was landing on deaf ears. So, ilang elections na yan, isa ako sa mga nanawagan na pwede ba umupo muna tayo at magkaisa tayo. So, there was that little window nung panahon ni Lenny na kahit paano nagsama-sama, and yet marami pa ring malalim pa din ang distrust sa isa't isa. So, I think isa yan sa mga dapat pag-aralan ng mabuti, yung sarili nating kilusan ng pagbabago dito sa Pilipinas, no? Wala akong mapanghawakan na pwede kong sabihin, inspired ako at itatayo ako ang pangalan ko kasi none of the political movements here right now really inspire me, no? Yun ang isang problema ko. So, I think hindi lang ako nag-iisa dyan. Maraming mga kasama nung panahon ng martial law, panahon ni Marcos, opposition na they would rather not be identified with any political groupings because, pagka sumama ka, na nalilabel ka na kaagad na you embrace the full agenda of a particular force. Tapos labeling na yan, wala ka ng espasyo to expand yourself, your connection. So that's the problem of the movement here. Something to really think about. Kasi sa tingin ko, kulang pa ng reflection eh. Whichever political forces these are, kulang ng reflection, kulang ng malalim na pag-aaral kung ano naman yung mga weaknesses natin. So after limbawa nung campaign ni Lenny, naghahanap ako ng pag-uusap na mas makasali sa pag-uusap. Saan ba tayo nagkulang? Saan ba tayo nagkamali? And I have joined one or two conversations. Hindi malalim ang pag-aaral. Ganon din ang nangyari nung previous local elections, yung senators na natalo lahat. Hindi malalim ang pag-aaral. Kaya yun ang isa sigurong masasabi ko na hamon and also a source of disappointments on my part.
Yeah. So, well, on the one hand, kailangan maging accountable din yung mga nasa opposition, no, for its own weaknesses and failings, no. Pero may pananaw din na, well, a lot of this weakness is a result then of the red tagging na nabanggit mo rin, no? There are so many people who are afraid of being red tagged, no? So it's been very difficult to organize, to do this kind of reflection, at least as a group, di ba? Konting kilos lang, mare-red tag ka na, and then you'll be afraid for your family, and so it's created this self-censorship, this chilling effect, etc. So, in a way, would you say that the red tagging, regardless of how wrong it is, has been effective?
Well, first of all, Howie, yung red tagging naman, it's not a new phenomenon under Duterte. It's always been there, no? When I was arrested and eventually detained under Cory Aquino's administration, I was a case of having been red tagged. So, sa akin hindi bago yan eh. And I think that the progressive movements are resilient enough that we could overcome these challenges such as red tagging. Sa tingin ko lang ang problema is paano pinapaliwanag ang red tagging such that mabibigyan mo ng koneksyon yung repression na ganyan sa realidad ng ordinaryong tao sa kalye. Kasi, halimbawa, bigyan kita ng example. Nung panahon ng pandemya, na-involve ako sa isang project on human rights na i-survey kung ano ang attitude ng mga tao tungkol sa human rights, no? At ang objective nito is para makagawa ng mga communication projects that will bring human rights closer to home kasi nga everyone is affected by the pandemic. So it was very revealing to me that when the respondents were asked about what they think of human rights, almost unanimously, ang sagot na nakuha namin, this cuts across different class backgrounds of respondents. Human rights was ano was framed by the respondents as something out there. It's a legal thing. It's something for the courts to address. Malayo sa realidad nila ang human rights. Samantalang ang realidad nila sa gitna ng pandemic yun is a question of human rights already, no? Inequitable distribution ng ayuda nung panahon ng pandemya. Hindi yun nila nakikita na human rights yun. Hindi nila nakikita yun na responsibility yun ng government or maski responsibilidad nila sa kapwa, sa isa't isa. Tinanong namin sila tungkol sa question, anong tingin nila sa mga nagpaprotesta kasi patuloy naman yung pagpaprotesta ng ilang progressive forces ng panahon ng pandemya. Almost unanimously ang sagot, hindi sila nakakatulong, nanggugulo sila. So sa akin as an activist, it was very humbling kasi all these decades that I've been involved in human rights activism, I thought nagkaroon na tayo ng dent doon sa consciousness ng mga tao, pero hindi. Ganun ang pananaw nila. So I was humbled, but at the same time, it really posed deeper questions in me. Ano ang kulang sa human rights activism at ganun, hindi natin naaabot ang mga ganong klaseng pananaw ng ordinaryong tao sa mga komunidad, no? Pero syempre, limited yung study namin. Hindi mo naman pwedeng sabihin na ganon yung kalakhan. Pero at the same time, dahil random yung pagpili namin ng mga respondents, parang may weight naman yung resulta ng aming survey, ng aming focus group discussion na ginawa. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Sa punto kanina na binabanggit natin na ano yung kailangan na reflection ng oposisyon, mga kilosang pagbabago, I think we really have to study, look deeper into how we communicate, how we relate with ordinary people on the streets. Talagang ang layo pa natin. And I've heard of unfortunate stories na nung panahon ng election, naga-house to house, yung ating mga kaibigan from gated communities pupunta sa mga depressed communities at hindi nila alam paano nila i-handle yung interaction nila sa mga tao, no? Sa mga depressed communities. Magdadala ng ayuda, pero yung question, there is that hindi naka-breakthrough doon sa invisible wall between them and the people in those communities kasi nga yung class, no? Hindi sila handa na pumunta sa mga depressed communities at ang mga nasa depressed communities man hindi handa na pupuntahan sila ng mga kaibigan nating burgis, no? At makikipagkaisa sa kanila. So, yung journey na yan, mahabang paglalakbayan na kailangan, yung mismong gustong makaabot sa mga kababayan natin na nasa mga komunidad na yan, ay kailangan ding tingnan ang sarili bago sila pumunta sa mga communities na yun at mag-outreach. Hindi yan madaling gawin. Pero ang pag-uumpisahan mo yan is magkaroon ka ng self-awareness na mayroon kang power relationship na kailangan tawirin para maabot mo sila. At hanggang hindi ka aware na meron kang ganong klaseng power dynamics or power relationship sa kanila, hindi ka maka-breakthrough sa kanila at hindi ka makakatulong sa pagbabago ng kanilang pananaw. So yun ang aking reflection.
Yes. Well, totoo nga yan. Obviously, there's that barrier, no? Pero on the other side of it, yung reflection ko naman noong mga panahon na yon, kasi kahit yung mga ibang miyembro ng pamilya ko, ganun din ang ginagawa, no? Pati yung mga kaibigan din ng anak ko, no? Lumalabas din sa community nila para mangampanya sa mga ibang communities, no? Ako ang feeling ko noon, wow, parang ngayon ko lang nakita to. Yun nga, kahit galing sa gated community, lumalabas sila doon, nakikipag house to house. I mean, nandun yung intention. Basically, you're saying, baka kulang pa sa method or approach, no? Pero yung motivation to go out and interact with people and try to convince them about something good, especially younger people, that was something new, no? Parang yun ang unang political experience nila, and maybe it's the first time na may nagkaroon silang ng diskusyon, ng seryosong diskusyon ng mga tao na hindi nila katulad.
Totoo yan. Pero ang question dyan, Hawi, nagawa na yan, nabigyan natin ng espasyo na mangyari yung ganong klaseng pagkakataon. But how do you sustain that? Yun ang kulang eh. Kasi wala pang movement na sumasalo sa kanila. Kasi pag bumalik na sila pagkatapos ng eleksyon, magkanya-kanya ng kung saan ka so, kung saang grupo ka napasama, di yun ang mag-aalaga yun ang magsusustain ng karanasan mo na napakaganda, no? Pero wala yung solidong movement eh. Yun ang kulang eh. Na magdadala niyan, no? Para maging isang tunay na kilusan siya ng pagbabago.
And parang nag-dissipate yung energy. I mean, where do you go? Kunyari, yung mga bagong politicized, yung mga kabataan na politicized ng mga kampanya na yun. Where do they go now if they want to continue their involvement? I want to ask you now about the International Criminal Court. You worked for a long time for Amnesty International in London, which is one of the oldest international human rights groups. And you've been quite skeptical, no, about the ICC's potential for delivering justice to the Philippines. Kasi yun, katatapos lang ng era kung saan the government actually advocated killing people, and it happened, no? That was a campaign promise that was kept, no, by my former President Duterte. And now many people are crying for justice at inaasahan yung ICC para magkaroon ng katarungan, no? Anong pananaw niyo diyan? Maaasahan ba natin yung International Criminal Court para magbigay ng katarungan sa mga naging biktima sa Pilipinas?
I don't know kung skeptical ang ma-describe ko sa pananaw ko. Siguro I'm just being realistic. Kasi tiningnan ko yung mga iba't ibang cases na nakarating na sa ICC at inabot talaga ng maraming taon yan. So, isa yan siguro sa realidad ko. Pangalawang realidad ko, yung the fact na, you have countries like the US and China, two big superpowers who have not signed up to the ICC, the Rome Statute of the ICC. So, which means that may problema sa credibility, sa kakayanan ng ICC na talagang mapursigi ito. Pangatlo, yung usapin din ng the current global political context. I'm very disturbed by what is happening in the Israel-Palestine insofar as its impact on the future of human rights. Sa totoo lang. Kasi yung Israel and Palestine, ilang beses na yan nagkaroon ng attempt na dalhin din yan sa ICC at hindi makabuelo ang mga organizations na gustong dalhin yan sa ICC kasi ang lakas-lakas ng lobby in favor of Israel insofar as its illegal occupation of Palestine. So, ibig sabihin, may politics na nagaganap kung bakit may pagka-selective yung mga cases na kayang pumasok sa ICC. Hindi natin maialis yan. May politics dyan. Pero more than yung ICC, disturb ako sa nangyayari ngayon sa Israel-Palestine kasi lahat na yata ng prinsipyo sa libro ng human rights ay nababiolate at lahat ng bansa na inaasahan mo dahil sila yung mga namuno nung binuo yung Universal Declaration of Human Rights after World War II, ay sila ngayon ang humaharang para dalhin ang Israel sa korte. Itigil man lang yung nangyayari ngayon sa Gaza. Kaya ang bigat-bigat ng implication yan sa credibility ng human rights system kasi sila yung mga bansa na to, US, the UK, European Union, ito yung mga bansa na nagtutulak ng accountability ng mga bansa tulad ng Pilipinas noong panahon ni Duterte. No, ito yung mga bansa na nagtutulak supposedly for accountability, and yet sila ngayon yung nasa front line na kailangan managot sa nangyayari sa Gaza. So ang bigat ng repercussion niyan sa future ng human rights. Yung mga images tulad ng ginawa sa mga Jews ng Holocaust, mabigat yan. Yung ibig sabihin yan sa ginagawa ng Israel ngayon sa Gaza. The UDHR, if you remember, was framed because of what happened during the Holocaust.
Okay, tama ka, no? Israel is quite influential, lalo na US is a major ally of Israel. So that could be one reason why Israel is able to do these things with, in the past at least, with impunity. Frankly, I mean, I've never seen this kind of public outcry against Israel in my life, no? Of course, deserving naman dahil sa ginagawa nila sa Gaza, no? But itong outpouring of support for Palestine and against Israel worldwide, parang historic, no? But going back to the Philippines and the ICC, you know, so parang I'm not sure if I see the parallel, no? So yung sinasabi mo na, it's hard to make Israel accountable because it's backed by the US, which is very influential in making any country accountable, no? So do you think ganun din ba yung influence ng Pilipinas para hindi maging accountable si Duterte sa ICC?
It's the political context because the US now has found a very good ally out of the BBM government. So sa tingin ko, ang onus ngayon will be on the BBM government whether it will open the Philippines for investigation by the ICC prosecutor. Ngayon, pero the signal that's happening globally sa global context will play an important factor in terms of hanggang saan itutulak ng mga government na ito na maka-influence sila sa BBM government to open itself up. And I think that dyan naglalaro ngayon yung domestic politics, yung political dynamics ngayon between BBM and the Dutertes at saka yung usapin ng US and to a certain extent, no, yung US-China conflict. It's very complex. Hindi mo makitaan immediately ng evidence yan na may influence yan sa ICC. Pero it is playing a role. So, titingnan mo yan ang signal kung hanggang saan itutulak ni BBM ang pressure sa kanya regarding opening the country to investigation of Duterte's crimes against humanity.
Okay, well, speaking of domestic politics and the role of the Marcos government now is pagdating doon sa kaso sa ICC, I mean, si Senator Amy Marcos has been saying na the release of De Lima from prison proves that the Philippine judicial system is working and there's no need for the ICC. Yeah, there's the International Criminal Court does not need to meddle anymore now with our affairs in the Philippines dahil nga dapat pumasok ang ICC pag nagfi-fail yung state, no, in delivering justice for its own people. But kayo, anong pananaw niyo? Does the release of De Lima prove anything? Does it help the Philippine government's case when it argues that there's no need for ICC dahil
Ako ang
hey,
tingin
we
ko,
have rule of law here, we have justice in the Philippines.
yeah, ako ang tingin ko dyan, pogi points lang yan. Hindi yan ang first level of communication nila. Palalabasin nila, no? That Dilima is a trophy for the BBM government in terms of, the justice system is working. At palangga din nila yan para makapunto sila para ma-placate nila yung threat sa mga Dutertes na BBM is already changing its mind about the ICC. First level of communication yan eh. Ang malalim na titingnan dyan kung hanggang saan susuporta ang US kay BBM para itulak ang ICC. At isang point of leveraging dyan would be China. So yun ang yun ang laro dyan eh. But US can still play an influential role in terms of delaying or hastening the ICC process in the Philippines. That's how I look at it. Hindi mahihiwalay sa ICC ang global political dynamics na yan.
Okay, nabanggit ko nung umpisa, no? You worked for a long time with Amnesty International, no? What is that? Ano ba yung Amnesty International?
Amnesty International is an international human rights organization that was established in the 1960s, nung panahon ng repression sa Portugal, no? A group of British came together and started their letter writing to the dictatorship then in Portugal for the release of the so-called, what we known as prisoners of conscience. Anyway, it is a membership-based organization, unlike other international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, for instance, no? Which is a straightforward international NGO. Amnesty International is a hybrid of being a movement because it has members in more than 100 countries. But at the same time, it is an NGO kasi it has an international secretariat with hundreds of staff from different parts of the world coming together in doing the research, doing their global campaigning, strategizing, etc., etc. When I got my post in 1990, I was one of the 2 Filipinos in a staff of more than 400.
Sa main headquarters to, sa London.
Main headquarters sa London. 2 lang kaming Pilipino noon. And naabutan ko ang Amnesty, which is predominantly talagang white, European, no, or British. Kakaunti lang kami na galing from the third world or the South. And I came at a very opportune time kasi yun yung panahon na nape-pressure na yung Amnesty International to be more diverse, to be more grounded, in those countries where it has done very well in terms of researching and campaigning for human rights violation. So may pressure sa Amnesty na kailangan mas maging grounded siya sa mga bansa kung saan gumagawa siya ng kanyang investigation para Amnesty will really truly become a global movement. So, nangyari. And so, tinawag ko siya na opportunity kasi I came at the right time. And so, I was one of those very vocal inside the organization that really pushed for diversity, multiculturalism, etc., etc. Issues that were so unknown to an organization that is predominantly European-centered, if you like, no? And most of its funding came from European Union chapters, no? And then US and Canada. So, nagkaroon kami, ako and several other coming from the South, became an important voice inside the organization. And I think that we made an impact in terms of expanding the perspective of the organization. So, for a longest time, and even until now, Amnesty International probably is emblematic of the criticisms about human rights as being solely focus on civil political rights and not looking at socio-economic rights, no? Malaking debate yan sa loob ng global human rights movement, including within Amnesty. So may mga adjustments siyang ginawa, especially nung nagkaroon ng malaking challenge sa mga Asian countries tulad ng Singapore, Malaysia, China, na hindi na adequate na civil political rights lang ang binibigyan ng emphasis. Pag sinabing universality, indivisibility of rights, it should be looking at socio-economic rights, no? And I think may validity, may strength yung criticism na yon sa human rights. And I really believe na yun yung sinasabi ko sa'yo, may critique ako sa human rights kasi nga tingin ko talaga namang for a longest time, for many decades, ang primacy ng civil political rights naka-contribute din sa pag-narrow down ng understanding ng publiko on what is actually human rights. Yun yung sinasabi ko sa'yo kanina na nung tinatanong namin yung mga tao about human rights sa panahon ng pandemya, ang tingin nila legal yan, korte yan. Hindi nila nakikita na human rights ay tungkol din sa sikmura. Kasi nga, ganun ang naging paradigm for a longest time, no? And I have to admit na dapat talaga pakinggan ng mabuti ang mga sinasabi ng mga nagkikritik na dapat bigyan din ng equal attention ang socio-economic rights. At bakit hindi? Kasi the United Nations was designed such that when it comes to socio-economic rights, walang malinaw na mechanism to make governments accountable on socio-economic rights violations. Unlike civil political rights. Yun ang problema eh. Fundamental problem yan ng international human rights system natin.
Gusto ko lang idagdag, no? Kasi for a lot of people, baka ngayon lang nila narinig na ipaliwanag yung kung ano yung Amnesty International. I just want to add na kasi maraming human rights organizations sa mundo, no? But Amnesty International is probably the most prominent and influential, no? Nanalo to ng Nobel Prize nung 1977. Sabi mo nga, it was a very white organization. Nung pumasok ka, you're a person of color and you're a woman and you were advocating more inclusivity and diversity within this large and influential human rights organization. One of your causes was not just economic rights, socio-economic rights, but gender rights, no, women's rights, no, especially this campaign against violence against women, no. I want to ask you about this, no, kasi you helped put this on the international agenda, and it gained you some prominence and gave you influence as well, pero in Pilipinas kasi, this is something I've always wondered about. Our society, at least, has been constantly praised or frequently praised for women's rights, gender equality, and I'm sure you see a lot of contradictions here, no? Kasi, like, for example, I looked it up before this interview. In the latest Global Gender Gap Index report, no, ng World Economic Forum, the Philippines, it has long been deemed the most gender equal country in Asia. So we're the most gender equal country in the biggest continent in the world, and we're ranked now 16th. We're actually improving from last year. We were 19th. We're now 16th. But at the same time, you and I and many other Filipinos still see so much abuse of women, diba? In particular, in more recent years, no? Kasi you were also involved in this online movement na may hashtag na Babae Ako. Itong hashtag Babae Ako campaign against Duterte in particular, kasi this started when the presidential candidate Duterte in 2015, 2016 was saying these misogynistic things, no, and making jokes about rape. So nag-umpisa kayo along with other people, no, itong Babae Ako campaign online nagiging viral, may hashtag, and nabilang pala ito nung taong 2018 as among Time Magazine's most influential on the internet, no. Yeah. Itong Babae Ako was lauded as among the most influential in the world, no, by Time Magazine. Ang tanong ko, with this kind of impact, and with our society being known as respectful to women, mataas tayo sa mga rankings ng gender equality, nanalo pa rin yung katulad ni Duterte, whom your movement thoroughly documented lahat ng mga sinabi niya, no, against women publicly, which were denounced worldwide, no, shocked a lot of people, and yet he won the election and he retained his popularity despite not really toning down the sexist language. He's still making jokes, kissing strange, OFW women on the lips, diba? Yung mga ganong klaseng notoriety, and yet he retained his popularity throughout his presidency. Parang, I mean, how can that happen? No, now supposedly we have this high respect for women traditionally. It's not because of institutions lang or because of laws, no, but because of our culture. Dati pa, pre-colonial pa yan, di ba? We were more gender equal or more gender inclusive than the colonizers, di ba? And yet, may ganito tayong politika. How can you explain this, Edna?
Ako, while I take pride in what we've done when babae ako was still up and running, at the same time, ako personally, I was problematizing that we're only good in social media, and that unless we transform our social media presence into a real movement, it will be a short-term success, if you like, no? Kasi social media, short-term memory yan eh. Sa ngayon, popular ka, bukas hindi na. Ganun klase. You rely on algorithms to sustain yourself, and you have to keep on feeding into that world of na hindi naman talaga, na masyadong mabilis at hindi naman talaga nagkakaroon ng solid na impact sa buhay ng tao. Alisin mo yung social media, kahit na hindi nangyari yung babae ako at wala kaming ginawa na gano'n sa social media, ang realidad pa rin is that we are still essentially, basically a country of machismo. Malakas pa rin ang machismo patriarchy sa Pilipinas. Tapos yung usapin ng pagbabago sa relasyon, ano yan eh, mahabang proseso yan na nagkailangan may pagbabagong kailangan mangyari sa pag-iisip, pananaw, hindi lang ng kalalakihan, kundi ng mga kababaihan mismo. But I must say, no, kung i-compare ko siya nung panahon namin nung ako ay bata-bata pa at ngayon, in fairness naman, marami nang nagbago sa attitude ng lalo na ng mga kabataan sa usapin ng kanilang karapatan bilang babae. Wala kami yung nakikita ko ngayon na assertion ng mga kabataang babae sa kanilang karapatan, control over their bodies, and even their identities, or gender identities. Wala yan nung panahon namin. So, ibig sabihin, may progression naman. Pero ang problema dito, nagkakascade ba yan sa mga komunidad na kailangan talaga nating bigyan ng pansin? Kasi karamihan ng mga incidents of gender-based violence sa ngayon ay nangyayari sa mga poor and depressed communities. Hindi na masyado doon sa mga educated sectors ng lipunan. So, ibig sabihin, malakas pa rin yung gap. Kaya nangyayari yung ganung mga klaseng cases, no? Marami pa din. And then, of course, there is the question of power again, no? Sa mga komunidad. Kung sino yung may access sa justice, kung sino yung marunong magdepensa ng sariling kabataan, yun na may chances na makapanalo. Pero kung wala kang ganung klase, ang mas preoccupation mo ay saan ka kukuha ng susunod mo na kakainin, access to justice or even tapping on the justice system will be the last in your list of concerns, kasi kailangan mo kumain sa susunod na oras eh. So yun ang isang problema natin.
Mhm.
May connection talaga yung economic status ng mga tao kung bakit nangyayari pa rin ang mga ganong klaseng problema tulad ng gender-based violence. Yung
Oo.
statistics na kinote mo, year after year, palagi mataas ang ranking ng Pilipinas. Isa rin tayo sa pinakamataas pagdating sa, kunyari, educational attainment ng mga kababaihan, no? Access to education ng mga kababaihan. Pero yun ang problema sa statistics eh, kasi um, pag-aaralan mo kung yung education na yan, nagta-translate ba yan in terms of improvement in their quality of life. Kasi ako, kunyari nung nakaraang mga taon, kinwestiyon ko yung statistics na yan kasi ang tanong ko, bakit patuloy pa rin na dumadami yung paglabas ng mga kababaihan bilang migrant workers, no? Mga highly educated college graduates itong ating mga migrant workers na nagtatrabaho bilang um, domestic workers sa labas ng bansa. Bakit sila lumalabas? Pero kasama sila doon sa statistics mo na mataas ang access to education. So may ganung klaseng disconnect no sa statistics na yan at saka yung realidad. Kasi walang opportunity para sa kanila dito sa bansa. Lalabas at lalabas sila kasi kailangan nilang kumayod para mapakain yung pamilya sa Pilipinas. So ganun lang,
Mhm.
ganun kasimple yung logic eh, 'di ba?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, oo. Well, gusto ko lang balikan yung sinabi mo na, we're still predominantly a macho society, no? Kung saan umiiral yung machismo nga. So so are you saying may pagka myth o mythology itong reputation natin, itong ranking na we're the most gender equal society in Asia, and we don't really deserve that reputation dahil yun nga, halimbawa may ganun tayong political leader na napaka-sexist ang o misogynistic ang lumalabas sa kanyang bibig, no? Popular pa rin, mahal pa rin siya ng mga babae. So I've been trying to understand this, itong parang seeming contradiction, pero sinasabi mo ang reality is, itong statistics ay hindi talaga nagre-reflect kung ano yung tunay na sitwasyon.
Tsaka yung attitude kay Duterte, ano yan eh, it's a cultural problem and you and I work in the cultural sphere, no? And we know that culture change is the most difficult, the most challenging aspect of social change to happen. Yun ang realidad. Hindi myth yung mga achievements na naganap tungkol sa usapin na yan, ng gender equality, hindi myth yan. Pero problematic siya. At hindi siya dapat nagtatapos sa pagtingin lang sa mga numero. Kailangan pag-aralan ano ba ang kwento sa likod ng numero. At yun nga, sabi ko, tingnan na lang natin yung kwento ng mga migrant workers na mga na babae. Bakit patuloy na dumadami ang lumalabas at nagtitake ng risk na maging domestic workers sa mga bansa na kung saan chances are aabusuhin sila. Bakit lalabas at lalabas pa rin? Kasi ekonomiya, pagkain, pag-aaral, housing, yun ang basic na motivations nila. Pakialam ba nila kung si Digong ay nambastos ng babae, hindi basta nagbibigay ng kasiyahan sa kanila, panandali ang kasayahan na merong presidente who can make jokes about them as women, wala yan. No, basta kayod lang sila. Yun lang ang basic attitude and you have to, babaguhin mo yan and how do you change that? Mahabang kwento yung culture change na yan.
Okay, I have a final question lang about gender, no? Nung 2022 presidential campaign, no, madalas na highlight yung gender ni former Vice President Leni Robredo, na siya lang yung babae dito sa field of men, no? Ay minsan pinapakita yung mga sapatos, siya lang yung naka-high heels, no?
Mm.
Doon sa mga nakaupo sa mga debate, etc., no? Do you think her gender was an advantage or disadvantage to the Philippine electorate?
Depende, no? I think she inspired many women in terms of yung aura niya of being humble, being hardworking, being um, people-centered at saka yung compassion niya sa mga nasa laylayan. Many women were inspired by that, no? But on the other hand, I think, babalik ko na naman dun sa survey namin nung pandemic, tinanong namin sila, ano ang nakikita nyo dapat maging presidente sa susunod na eleksyon, 2022. Lumabas, mataas ang ranking. Kailangan matapang. Matapang at hindi corrupt, yung dalawang yan. So, sa katapangan, medyo nag-low point si VP Lenny, ano? Kasi ang hinahanap nilang katapangan, yung pinapakita ni Digong nung panahon na yon, no? Hindi corrupt, mataas ang puntos ni Lenny doon, no? Kung si Sara ang tumakbo instead of BBM, mananalo si Sara kasi she would fit into that imagined katapangan ng isang babae. So sa akin hindi masyadong nag-figure yung gender sa election sa tingin ko. Hindi masyadong napatampok yun. Although as I said, she inspired many. Pero hindi not enough to be able to, let's say, win the women's vote. No, there was no women's vote that would have made her win.
Oo. And there could have been women who did not vote for her because she was a woman and thought that she was weak. Hanggang ngayon may cultural preference para tayong ganun. Kasi you and I are old enough to remember the 1986 election, yung snap election in February 1986, and you also probably still remember the campaign ads of President Marcos Sr. back then, who kept highlighting the gender of his opponent, Cory Aquino, na parang yung babae lang
housewife,
ako, di ba?
Housewife. Yeah.
Housewife, and then so which also apparently did not work, no? Kasi nalo pa rin si Cory. But obviously there was a belief that would turn off voters, no? As far back as then, no, 1986. Pero even then, many Filipino voters were willing to vote for a woman. Of course, that was far from the only issue back then. So maybe Cory won despite being a woman.
Yeah.
May mga na-turn off pa rin ng kanyang gender. Pero of course, they were probably much larger issues back then.
Yes. Yeah. At saka ang context noon, vis-a-vis gender and women, ibang-iba sa panahon na ngayon, no? Mas maraming choices ngayon. Tapos mas maraming choices, mas maraming factors na pag-aara na pwedeng ibigay option sa mga tao maliban sa gender ng isang kandidato.
I mentioned 86 na, no? So I want to go back to those times. You were already you were an activist then. You've been an activist all your life.
Yeah, first quarter storm.
So first quarter storm was 1970.
Yeah.
1970. So yun ang umpisa mo talaga, 1970.
Yeah.
So 70s and all the way up to now, no? So and you've been through a lot, no? Your husband also, Alex, has been through a lot, was also imprisoned. And nagulat ako, no, na even your mother was imprisoned.
Yeah.
No?
My mother, my sister, and Alex were detained.
Yeah, and you were, all of you. Was there anything you regret about being an activist?
Okay. Being an activist, no regrets. But having not studied enough in terms of choices to be made, yes, there were regrets. I have to be honest, noong panahon na yun, napwersa naman kami mag-underground kasi lahat kami under threat na, no? So, wala nang ibang position nung kundi the National Democratic Movement. If you're part of the National Democratic Movement, you believe in armed struggle, and later on, you were led towards, being enthralled by the image of a socialist state, Communist Party as the vanguard in all of those things. So at a very young age, with very limited exposure to other schools of thought, yun siguro ang regret ko. No? I did not study enough. I did not have the opportunity to study enough and get exposed. But activism per se, I think it's still the most important part of my life na hindi ko lang iniisip ang sarili ko. And, and my radar every day until now at age 71 is still about what's happening in society. And I think it's a gift na I will always cherish, no? Na you're always looking at doing something good for others, no? And it aligns with my own foundation as a Christian, ganon, nung bata pa ako, because I was brought up as a Baptist by my mom. So yun ang reflection ko. Pero kung magbibigay ako ng advice, actually tinanong ako ng anak ko nung nasa Lasal siya. Iniimbita daw siya na sumali in one of those youth organizations na militante. So sabi ko sa kanya, anak, hindi kita pipigilan. Ang ma-advise ko lang sa'yo, magbasa ka pa. No? Study history and, take critical thinking as one of your foundations or your pursuit, no? So, sumunod naman ang anak ko. So, until he passed away, because he died in 2022, he became an independent, progressive-minded person. He brought up his daughters on those values that we brought him, that we taught him as his parents. Pero very careful siya about being organizationally stuck without knowing kung ano yung papasukan niya. Pero he was very courageous. And same with my two other children. So yun, yung kanilang sensitivity sa mga paligid nila are comparable to those of activists. Pero naging matindi sa kanila yung pag-nurture ng kanilang individuality as independent persons with their own minds and making choices on the basis of well-studied options. Yun siguro yung masasabi ko na I should have done that. Pero walang opportunity kasi nga nag-underground na kagad. I even dropped out of college because of martial law. So yun siguro ang regret ko. And then of course, regret ko din there were episodes in life where sometimes activism made me make harsh judgments also in life. Dumaan din ako dyan. Ang black and white ang tingin mo sa mga buhay-buhay kasi nga nasa survival mode ka palagi. So wala kang middle ground, ganon. Yun siguro yung cost of having to live through those dark years of martial law. Wala kang choices talaga. Every day is a survival mode.
Yun nga, no? So it was very difficult to be an activist in those days. Libo-libo nga yung nakulong, napatay, no? But sometimes activists, veterans of martial law will tell younger people na swerte pa nga kayo ngayon di ba? Napakahirap nung panahon namin nung martial law, no? Totoo ba yun?
Depende kung ano yung degree ng involvement mo Kasi kunyari, kung i-compare ko yung 15 years of Marcos martial law, 15 years, 72 to 86, no? Sa 15 years. Ang latter years na yon maluwag na no? Mas malaki na yung democratic space. But comrades who stayed in the underground continued to live a difficult life, no? Nasa underground sila, they chose to be in the underground. I'm one of those who chose to work above ground and build networks, no? build organizations of artists, and that's where I first met you. Kaya pag nagsabi na mas mahirap ng panahon namin, anong period ng martial law ang tinutukoy na mahirap? Ganon. Kung titingnan ko yung nangyayari sa ngayon, may sariling difficulty ang mga aktivista ngayon. Kasi ang dami-daming kalaban. No? Andyan yung kalaban mo ang disinformation because of social media. No? Andyan yung problema ng navigating the terrain of government institutions, no? Na meron kang premise na madali mong kakausapin kasi civil servant sila pero very corrupt, no? Nandyan yung walang tigil na stereotyping sa iyo pagka ikaw ay maingay sa komunidad, no? At nandyan na rin syempre, kasama na dyan yung usapin ng red tagging. Mas complex ang sitwasyon sa ngayon eh. Hindi siya madali, sa totoo lang. Seemingly maluwag siya kasi may environment ka na nakakakilos ka, supposedly na maluwag, pero may sarili siyang complexities na wala nung panahon namin. Nung panahon namin straightforward eh. Lalo na nung the last 5 years, from panahon ng papal visit na lumuwag, nagkaroon ng attempt ng election na. The first time na nag-election, lumuwag naman talaga. Hindi mo na nararamdaman yung martial law except probably if you're in the countryside waging or part of the NPA, no? So yun ang mga difficulties talaga. Pero kung mga tulad namin na kumikilos na above ground, hindi eh. Nagrarally tayo as concerned artists of the Philippines. Pero straightforward, madali mong basahin yung environment, kumbaga, ng panahon na yon. And that we don't have that now. Mas complex ang gumawa ka ng political analysis. Ngayon, mas complex siya.
What do you miss most about the past?
I miss most yung rigors ng pag-aaral. Kasi as an activist, in an organized way, no? Naging member ako ng underground. Nag-aaral kami kahit papano, kahit nasabihin ko na sana mas malawak ang pinag-aaralan. Wala kami masyadong espasyo, wala kaming mobile phones, wala kaming social media. Kaya kung hindi ka kumikilos, kung hindi ka gumagawa ng political task mo, nag-aaral ka, no? I miss that. I miss the camaraderie na sabay-sabay kayong kumakain, kung may ulam, may kakainin kayo, sabay-sabay kayong kakain. I miss the camaraderie. And I miss activism na may impact ka kaagad sa gusto mong gawin. Isang halimbawa na lang, panahon ng nasa concerned artist of the Philippines ako, namatay si Ninoy, no, nagkita-kita sa Santo Domingo Church. Sabi ni Lino, gawa tayo ng concerned artist of the Philippines. Kinabukasan may concerned artist of the Philippines na. Ang bilis kumilos, ang bilis gumawa ng action, no? I miss those. I miss those thousands and thousands of mobilization nung libing ni Ninoy, libing ni Lian Alejandro, no? Kasama mo mga nagmamarcha kayo, miles and miles of marches. I miss those. Now, parang pagka may mga mobilization until pwede pa ako, no, hahanapin mo yung mga usual familiar faces. Hindi mo na sila kilala, so ang hirap mag-strike ng conversation. So, yun ang Kaya lately, I've stopped going na to rallies kasi parang it's not for me anymore. I prefer one-on-one conversation or meetings, no, where you can really share your stories like what we're doing now.
What do you appreciate most about the present?
I really like the energy of the young people. Parang nabubuhayan ako ng loob sa nakikita kong assertion nila. Na-inspire ako sa mga creatives natin, no? Very robust pa rin ang production ng mga artworks natin. Na-inspire ako ng mga kaibigan sa media na patuloy na nakikibaka. Although nakikita ko yung mga challenges. Um, Na-inspire ako ng mga ilang headways na nagaganap sa komunidad. Kahit papaano may mga sariling kayod yung mga non-activists na community organizers. Nakikita ko sila. Nakaka-inspire yun kasi talagang on their own, yun ang mga tunay na social change actor sa tingin ko eh. On their own, without any support, sige lang, larga lang sila. I saw that very much during the Lenny Kiko campaign. Kasi umikot ako at nakita ko yung sinasabi mo kanina, on their own na kumikilos sila. Yun nga lang, ang regret nga lang doon is that hindi na nasusustain, hindi na salo. Otherwise, globally, nakakalungkot yung nangyayari. Nakakalungkot na Trump might have a comeback.
Yeah.
Nakakalungkot yung nangyayari sa UK ngayon. So many backsliding in the UK, a country that I love second to the Philippines. And nakakatakot ang China sa kanyang aggression, you know.
So, kasi napaka-involved ka ngayon sa mga social media campaigns tulad ng Babae Ako, and then more recently yung tungkol sa seniors sa panahon ng COVID, no? Paano naka-influence ang digital landscape at digital technology in general sa promotion and protection ng karapatang pagtao?
Malaki ang influence niya insofar as dissemination of information, pero nakakadismaya na ang babaw lang ng naaabot. So, speed of information, okay siya. Pero at the same time, ang kabilang mukha naman nun, ang lakas ng disinformation, ang hirap kalaban yung disinformation. And yung click culture, ng like, tapos hindi naman binabasa. Kaya hindi ako ganun kabilib pagdating sa algorithm na you have so many thousands, kunyari, of followers as yung panahon namin ng senior sa panahon ng COVID, we have 35,000. Sa Lenny, we have almost 15,000. 13,000 panahon ng eleksyon. Nakakatuwa, pero hindi ako believe dun eh. Kasi pagka nagtatawag na ako ng let's take this to the next level, konti lang ang responses. So, ganun. So, mabilis, pero nakakatuwa siya kasi pag nasa pool mo yung nag-post ka ng something that really, really interests them, you get so many likes, nakakatuwa. Pero, hanggang doon lang eh. Kaya may limit talaga yung digital landscape. May limit talaga siya. Hindi siya maasahan.
How do you perceive the current state of human rights in the Philippines? Saan ba tayo advance kung ikukumpara sa ibang bansa, the rest of the world, and saan naman tayo nahuhuli?
I think yung advances natin would be yung may basic awareness in terms of karapatan, no? Na hindi mo pwedeng gawin sa akin to kasi ganito. Kasi bawal yan, nasa batas yan. May ganong klaseng kalakhan na awareness compared, let's say, nung panahon ni Marcos, no? Pero na-achieve natin yan over the decades, hindi yan nangyari basta-basta. There are certain sectors of society na kailangan maingat ka na kasi sensitized sila in terms of what is acceptable or not. Even if they don't label that as a human rights problem, no? Alam nila, may awareness. Kunyari na lang sa seniors, hindi ka na pwedeng gumawa ng joke ngayon sa mga woke na seniors kasi alam nila what is ageism. At lalo na sa mga persons with disabilities, ang taas-taas ng level ng awareness ng mga PWDs na woke. Nakakatuwa sila. So may headways naman talaga, hindi ko yan naalisin in terms of basic awareness ng rights. Ang problema ko talaga, as I've been saying all along during this interview, is that where human rights should matter, meaning to say, yung mga kababayan natin na sa laylayan, hindi pa tayo nakakagawa ng ganong klaseng impact sa kanila, sa buhay nila. I think I can concretize this by saying, kunyari sa mga senior citizens, sa mga poor and depressed communities, ang tingin pa rin ng senior citizens sa kanilang karapatan ay ayuda. Kung ano yung makukuha nilang tulong ng kanilang mga LGUs. Ang layo nila dun sa usapin ng karapatan. Kasi hindi man lang sila aware na we have so many laws on senior citizens' rights. So yun ang malaking gap sa usapin ng where rights matter, we are not making an impact. Kasi sila yung mas nangangailangan ng rights, hindi yung ako na edukado, no, na comfortable ang buhay ko. Pero ako yung may mataas na awareness about rights. Pero hanggang hindi ko mayan magamit para mapaintindi ko yan sa kapwa ka-seniors ko na mga nasa laylayan. Walang silbi yung aking awareness na yan. We have to bridge that gap kasi otherwise, tayo-tayo lang ang nakakaintindi. Hindi natin talaga mababago yung lipunan kasi kung saan siya dapat kailangan gawin, hindi natin naaabot. So sa akin, ganun kasimple. Mga tindera sa palengke, hanggang ngayon, baon sa utang sa mga lenders, no? Yung mga suki ko sa palengke, alam mo, maganda yung paninda nila, maraming bili, pero labas-pasok yung pera, mamayang konti, nandiyan na, nag-aabang na yung nangungulekta ng utang nila. So, nakakalungkot. Ganun. Kasi may batas tayo about usury, but hindi man lang alam ng tindera kong suki na meron palang batas na dapat protectionan siya against usury. So, yun ang problema eh. Ang layo-layo. Ang dami nating achievements, pero woke pa rin ang nakaka-enjoy nun. Hindi yung mga dapat makikinabang talaga. And we have to do something about that.
Thank you for that challenge. And it's a good point to end on, Edna. No? So thank you for sharing your wisdom and memories. No? Edna Aquino, human rights campaigner and activist for 50 years. Maraming salamat sa inyong paglilingkod sa lipunan.
Maraming salamat sa
Mabuhay ka.
opportunity. Yeah, maraming salamat.
Hi, I'm Howie Severino. Check out the Howie Severino podcast. New episodes will stream every Thursday. Listen for free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and other platforms.